In this tutorial, we're going to cover the pressure settings. So again, we're going to come in here to the wrench. We're going to go into the pressure menu. In the pressure menu, the first thing that we come to is pump setup. We have our servo type. It's going to be a PWM 12-volt pump. There are multiple options in here if you have a different type of pump setup, although most common sprayers now are PWM 12-volt. We program in a servo minimum. So this is the minimum percent PWM that it'll send to the pump. Typically, most pumps are around a 23% minimum PWM value to get them to spin enough flow. The servo maximum usually is around 75 to 85%. Servo maximum, we can typically just set in 78. So this sets in the minimum and maximum pump PWM value that we will command to that pump. Servo manual speed. This is if you're in your pressure control settings and you hit that manual button and you're using the increase and decrease to change the pump PWM, this is how fast it's going to increase and decrease that pump PWM value. Your pump seal shutdown. This is how we deal with turning the pump off so we don't accidentally burn the seals up. So pump seal shutdown, it says that if it detects less than 7 kPa boom pressure, that it's going to automatically turn off the pump in order to save the seals, and you'll get a pump seal shutdown warning. Pump pulses per revolution and pump max speed. So if you have a pump speed sensor, you can put in how many pulses per revolution it generates, and you can also program in a maximum speed so that the PinPoint will use this information to make sure that your pump never exceeds a certain RPM. And RX method is just going to stay to average. You have a minimum pressure, so you program that in. It won't allow the PinPoint to get below that pressure set point. You have a maximum pressure. It won't allow PinPoint to spray beyond this pressure threshold right here. You have a max flow value that you can set in there. By the way, if you don't want a minimum or maximum pressure, you can just program those fields to 0 and that will disable them. Pump power up status, you're going to leave that to off. Don't ever put that in a different value. We're going to take our pump power up status off of our armrest controller or isobus. If you have a boom recirculation system that is operated through the isobus, some boom recirc systems are operated through the isobus. Some of those are independently wired on the machines. But if you do have a recirculation system that the PinPoint is in control of, you can set that to disable, manual, auto delay 30 seconds. So in manual mode, if I set this to manual and I go back out to my home screen, you see I get this boom recirc icon. When I turn the boom recirc off, the boom recirc stays off. When I click on it again and turn it on, the boom recirc stays on. And that's independent of whether the boom is spraying or not. So it'll turn it on and off independent of the boom, what the boom is actually doing. If I come back into that menu and I change this from manual to auto, what's going to happen in auto mode is that when the boom is off, the recirculation will be on. So it toggles it on and off based off of if a nozzle is spraying or not. So anytime a nozzle is spraying, boom recirc's off. We have a third setting in here called auto delay 30 seconds. This is our preferred operating method, and what this commands the boom recirc system to do is it says, hey, when we see the last nozzle go off, keep the boom recirc system off for 30 seconds before we turn it back on. And what this allows you to do is basically have time to make your turn row passes so that it's not turning the boom recirc on and off at the end of every pass. It's only turning it on when you have idle periods greater than 30 seconds. And again, if your boom recirc system is separate from the isobus and controlled with switches on the console, then you'll just leave this to disabled because the PinPoint won't be in control of that boom recirc system. If you do have a boom recirc system the PinPoint's in control of, you have to set your recirculation valve. Is it a normally open or a normally closed valve? And some machines have ball valves on them. The PinPoint 3 has a sequence where if you have a boom recirc system and ball valves, you can enable the cycle ball valves. And what that allows it to do is turn on the ball valves individually across the boom in order to recirc section by section when you still have ball valves. So that's it for the pump setup menu. The next menu that we have is sensor setup. So if you're using a capstan boom pressure sensor, that's going to be either a 0.5 to 5 volt or a 1 to 5 volt sensor. Typically, it's going to be a 1 to 5 volt sensor. You can see that right on the tag of the pressure sensor. It's going to give you a voltage range that pressure sensor operates in. And that pressure sensor is going to have a minimum and a maximum pressure rating. So this is in kPa. I'm used to PSI. So typically that's 0 to 100 PSI or 0 to 250 PSI. 250 PSI would be, approximately 6.9 bar. So you set your sensor minimum and maximum values. So pressure sensor 1 is going to be your boom pressure sensor. Then you also have the option in here to set up a sensor 2, which is going to be your sparge pressure sensor. So you just have to know what pressure sensor that you're tied into and what the min and max voltage and min and max pressure is on those particular pressure sensors. So again, you have your sensor 2 max on the second screen right there. So that's it for sensor setup. The next thing we have is control tuning. Typically in control tuning, these values are going to stay to default for almost all configurations. You're going to have a system gain of 1. And under that we have PID, which is proportional, integral, and differential gain. So these right here basically set how the PinPoint system drives the pump. Typically this 5, 1, and 1 is going to stay at 5, 1, and 1. And what we're going to do is if we want the pump to be more reactive or more aggressive, we're going to increase this system gain number. And when we increase this system gain number, it acts as a multiplier for P, I, and D. And it increases all of those together to make it more responsive. Or if our pump is over responsive, we can actually decrease this system gain number, which again acts as a multiplier to decrease all of those values proportionally. So again, if a system is under or over reactive from a pressure control standpoint, we're typically going to be adjusting the system gain setting and not the P, I, and D. You have a deadband pressure here, which is just a band around the target pressure that would be an acceptable pressure range to be in. Your run hold delay is going to be 0 milliseconds. Don't program anything in there. And rate sync is going to be set to disabled. And that is it for our pressure setup menus.